Okay, so today we're diving into a story well, it's just as shocking as it is important. It's the story of Stephen Phillips, a man who had more than 2 decades of his life completely stolen from him, all because of a simple but catastrophic mistake.
24. Just let that number sink in for a second. 24 years. That is how long Stephen Phillips spent locked away in a Texas prison for crimes he had absolutely nothing to do with.
You know, this story kind of starts at the end. We're in 2008. After serving almost a quarter century, Stephen Phillips walks out of prison, a free man and an innocent one.
And that just forces you to ask the big question, right? How does this even happen? How can an entire system fail so badly that an innocent person loses 24 years of their life? To figure that out, we've got to rewind. We have to go all the way back to the beginning.
So let's go back in time. We're heading to Dallas, Texas in the early 1980s. And you have to understand, this was a city on edge. A series of really violent crimes had shaken the city. And the police, they were under a ton of pressure to find a suspect and find one fast. And their focus, it landed on Stephen Phillips. Now, why him? Was it fingerprints? Some piece of evidence? No. It was because of the flimsiest reason you can imagine. A few eyewitnesses just said he looked like the guy. And this right here just perfectly illustrates the problem, doesn't it? On the one hand, you've got a police sketch, which is literally just an image built from someone's memory. And we all know how faulty memory can be. On the other hand, you have a real person, an innocent man, whose entire life is about to get destroyed because of that one fragile memory. So with Phillips identified, the case goes to trial. And this is where we really see the system's fatal flaw in action.
The most important thing to understand here is what the prosecution didn't have. There was zero DNA, no fingerprints, there was absolutely no concrete physical evidence linking Stephen Phillips to any of the crimes. The state's entire case was built on the shaky foundation of what somebody thought they saw. And that brings us right to the heart of the issue. Eyewitness misidentification. It's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. A witness makes a mistake and identifies the wrong person. It seems like a simple error, but man, the consequences can be absolutely devastating. And look, this isn't just some freak accident that happened in this one case. It's a massive, systemic problem. In fact, it's widely recognized as one of the single leading causes of wrongful convictions in America. It happens way more than you'd think. So after he was convicted, Stephen Phillips started a whole new chapter of his life, one that's pretty much unimaginable for most of us, fighting to prove his innocence from behind bars.
And this timeline, it just shows you how long and grueling that fight was. I mean, through the entire 80s and 90s, for 2 decades, he filed appeal after appeal, just begging for DNA testing that he knew could prove his innocence. Finally, in the 2000s, a glimmer of hope. The Innocence Project takes on this case. And that's what eventually led to that moment in 2008, when science finally delivered the truth. I mean, when you really break it down, his path to freedom was this marathon against just impossible odds. Think about it. It took years of his own relentless appeals, then the critical intervention of the Innocence Project, then what's basically a miracle, finding the original biological evidence decades later, and then, finally, the undeniable power of a DNA test. So, after all those years of fighting in court, that original biological evidence was found. It was sent to a lab, and for the first time in more than 20 years, science was finally going to get a say in this case. And here it is. The result, the DNA from the crime scene, it belonged to some unknown male. When they compared it to Stephen Phillips' DNA, the result was crystal clear, unambiguous. No match. After 24 years, science proved what he had been screaming all along. He was innocent. So in 2008, Stephen Phillips finally walked free. But, freedom after 24 years of wrongful imprisonment, it's not the simple happy ending you see in the movies. In many ways, it's the beginning of a whole new kind of struggle. I mean, just try to wrap your head around this. He went to prison in a world of cassette tapes and payphones. He came back to a world of streaming music and smartphones and the internet in your pocket. He didn't just lose time, he lost an entire era of human progress and connection. The state of Texas did at least acknowledge its catastrophic mistake.
Under their compensation laws at the time, Phillips was awarded nearly $6 million. Now, that's a huge sum of money, but it was meant to somehow account for those irreplaceable years that were just stolen.
But even then, his ordeal wasn't quite over. In a pretty controversial move, his ex-wife, who, by the way, had divorced him years earlier while he was in prison, she actually sued for a portion of that compensation money. And in the end, the court did award her a small share of it. But here's the thing. Instead of just taking the money and disappearing, trying to forget everything, Stephen Phillips did something incredible. He transformed all that trauma into a mission. He now speaks out, he advocates for criminal justice reform, and he uses his own story to make sure everyone understands the profound dangers of relying on something as fallible as eyewitness testimony. So in the end, yeah, he got his freedom and he got compensation. But the question his story leaves us with is, it's a big one. When a life is stolen from you, piece by piece, day by day, for 24 years, can you ever really, truly get it back?